Royce Maddox planted a boot beside Mary Crow's grave and told Elias he had until sunset to sign away the land or watch the Iron Saints drag him from the cabin. Elias looked 72 because he was 72. Thin wrists, bent shoulders, one hand trembling on a cane. June Bell stood at the fence with fear whitening her face, and Sheriff Wade Pritchard leaned against his cruiser as if a graveyard threat were county business. Royce slapped the deed onto the porch table. One biker fired into Elias's rain barrel. Another laughed when the old widower flinched. But Elias was not studying their guns. He watched the red clay stripe on Royce's boot. Swamp grass wound through a motorcycle chain, and the deputy who touched his radio whenever the North Woods went quiet. They had already found the hidden trail behind Mary's grave. Worse, they believed the washed-out bridge still carried weight. Royce checked the sun and smiled. "At dark, old man. This place belongs to us." Elias lowered his eyes, counted the seconds between engines, and knew the first mistake had already entered the swamp. If you enjoy stories where arrogant men discover too late that the old and forgotten were never helpless, leave a like, subscribe, and tell us what state or city you are watching from. Now let's go back to the morning they gave Elias Crowe until sunset. At 6 that morning, Elias had been tying a new throat into a crawfish trap beneath the lean-to, working copper wire with fingers that no longer closed all the way. The bayou beyond his garden held the dull color of old iron. Cypress knees rose from the blackwater like knuckles. Somewhere beyond the cane, a heron complained and lifted away. Elias heard June Bell's truck before he saw it, a loose fan belt giving one tired squeal at every turn of the engine. She came down the shell road with a basket of biscuits on the seat and a folded parish newspaper under her arm. "You eat yesterday?" she called before shutting the door. "Some." That means no. June was 63, widowed 12 years, and sturdy from a life of feed sacks, flooded roads, and refusing pity. She set the biscuits on the porch and nodded toward the fenced square beneath the live oak, where Mary lay under a river stone marker Elias had carved himself. June always nodded to Mary. Elias always noticed. The newspaper reported a warehouse fire outside St. Amant and 2 stolen farm trucks found stripped near the state line. Sheriff Wade Pritchard called the crimes unrelated. June tapped his photograph. "He says unrelated so often I'm beginning to think it's his favorite word." Elias folded the page. Men repeat words when they need the words to become true. June asked about the land office. Elias had received a third offer, this one disguised as an emergency flood easement. No engineer had visited, no public meeting had been held, and the paper demanded the southern 40 acres, the cabin, and the strip behind the cemetery leading toward the abandoned church road. He had returned it, unsigned. June lowered her voice. "Folks in town say the Iron Saints bought the old gin property. Folks in town say many things quietly. They say Royce Maddox has been meeting Pritchard after hours." Elias picked up the unfinished trap and tested the wire. That one they should say loudly. Motorcycles sounded beyond the North Woods, where no legal road existed, and a red clay rise narrowed between deep water. The engines advanced, stopped, and regrouped. Men were testing a route. Their leader had a map and a schedule. Elias turned on the cracked shortwave. Through static, he caught 3 quick microphone clicks, a pause, then one. Someone was testing a portable repeater inside the swamp. June saw the near-invisible change in his face. "What is it?" "Nothing yet." "That isn't the same as nothing." A brown sheriff's cruiser appeared through the pecan trees, followed by 4 motorcycles and a black pickup. June gripped the rail. Elias switched off the radio. Pritchard stepped out first, broad at the belt, his badge bright enough to make the visit look official. Royce Maddox dismounted behind him, lean and hard in an Iron Saints vest. Tucker Vane climbed from the pickup, older than the other bikers, and watchful enough to study the trees as if they remembered him. Pritchard took off his hat. Morning, Elias. Sheriff. Mrs. Bell. June did not answer. Royce looked past Elias to the cabin, then to Mary's grave, then toward the dark line of cypress south of the garden. He had already decided where value lay and where grief could be used. That made him easier to read than he believed. Pritchard produced a document folder. County's moving forward on that easement. We need your signature today. No county vote. Emergency authority. No engineer's mark. Clerical delay. No public notice. Pritchard's smile thinned. You always were particular. Royce stepped onto the porch without permission. His right boot left a faint smear beside the door. Elias saw the red clay at once. Not road dust. Dense, rust-colored soil from the rise behind Mary's grave, the only place on the property where that color showed through. The hidden trail had been covered by leaf mold for years, but fresh tires would have cut it open. Royce had trespassed before sunrise. He had not come to negotiate. He had come after confirming the route. Elias looked down long enough for Royce to mistake attention for submission. We're trying to make this painless, Royce said. You take the county money, move somewhere with plumbing that works, and everybody wins. My plumbing works. One of the younger saints laughed. Royce did not. The road behind your cemetery goes to the old church bridge. Pritchard glanced at him, irritated by the admission. Elias rested both hands on his cane. Bridge washed out in '73. Maps say otherwise. Maps don't bear weight. Tucker Vane looked toward the woods. For the first time, concern touched his face. Royce missed it. Pritchard laid the folder on the porch table. We'll give you until sundown. After that, I execute the emergency order, remove you from an unsafe structure, and secure the tract. June stepped forward. You can't evict a man under an easement. Pritchard turned the badge toward her. Don't interfere with county work, June. Royce lifted Mary's blue flower jar from the porch rail and let it break against the step. Elias's knuckles tightened on the cane, and he allowed the pain to show. Sunset, Royce said. Then the land changes hands. He crossed to Mary's grave, where threat became humiliation. His boot beside the stone, the deed on the table, a shot through the rain barrel, the gang laughing while Pritchard watched. Elias measured who watched the road, who touched a radio, and who refused to turn his back on the swamp. When the convoy finally left, it did not return to the parish road. 2 bikes went north. The pickup and cruiser went east. Royce took the southern shell lane alone, as though he wanted to inspect the property from another angle. 3 groups, 3 tasks. Sunset was not merely a threat. It was an operational deadline. June waited until the last engine faded. We call the state police. They'll call Pritchard. Then the attorney general. On what evidence? On that hole in your rain barrel. Pritchard will say I fired it. She looked at him with anger made from fear. So what do we do? Elias bent and picked up the largest piece of blue glass. First, you go home. No. June. I left you alone after Mary died because you asked. I left you alone when the parish started sending papers because you asked. I'm not leaving now because a criminal with a clean sheriff tells me to. Elias turned a shard of Mary's blue glass in his palm and let Royce's message settle into its proper shape. You're the leverage, Elias said. June's anger stopped. What? He looked at you before he looked at me. He knows I won't sign for myself. He wants to learn what I'll sign for. A motorcycle cracked somewhere beyond the cane, 1 hard acceleration, and then silence. Elias looked toward the Bell place, half a mile east beyond a narrow slough. June understood. Then I'm staying here. No. Here is where they'll expect you. He went inside, lifted a loose board beneath Mary's sewing cabinet, and took out a metal document case. The land patent, tax receipts, Mineral survey, marriage certificate, and Mary's death record lay wrapped in oilcloth. Beneath them was a faded photograph of 6 younger men in jungle fatigues. Elias did not look at it. He closed the case and handed it to June. Take the Pirogue Trail to Reverend Cole's old church. Hide this under the baptism floor. That church has been empty 10 years, which is why it still keeps secrets. She held the case against her chest. And you? I'll give them what they're expecting. A frightened old man? Elias looked toward Mary's grave. An old man, certainly. June left through the garden, carrying the case in a feed sack and moving with the quick, irritated steps of someone determined not to appear frightened. Elias watched until the cane swallowed her. Then he returned to the porch and began cleaning broken glass. Alone, Elias swept the porch, plugged the rain barrel, and ate a biscuit where any watcher could see an old man clinging to routine. Haste announced intention. Patience hit it. A deputy cruiser passed without stopping. Minutes later, the shortwave carrier rose and vanished, confirming a relay near the old fire tower. Pritchard was building a private radio pocket beyond the courthouse dispatcher's hearing. The set had belonged to Caleb Rusk. Its brass tag still carried scratched initials, and Mary had understood that Elias touched the casing before every hurricane because some objects were doors, not possessions. He opened the back panel and checked a wire repaired with cloth insulation. The set gave him a low hum. Good enough. He turned to a band used by shrimp boats and hunting camps, waded through 2 fishermen arguing about fuel, then keyed the microphone. Bay Mare lost a shoe at Crow Crossing, he said. Lantern out. 3 bells before dark. He released the key and waited. To anyone listening, it was rural nonsense. To Mara Ellison, if she still monitored the frequencies she once used, it was an old field code stripped down for civilian ears. Bay Mare meant compromised local authority. Lost a shoe meant mobility restricted. Crow Crossing gave the location. Lantern Out warned that the main channel could not be trusted. 3 bells before dark asked for lawful support before the 3rd quarter of the remaining daylight. There was no reply. Elias sent it once more, then shut down. Repeating would turn warning into exposure. Mara Ellison would understand the code if she still monitored the old frequency. 9 years earlier, while investigating stolen hurricane supplies, she had trusted Elias's knowledge of a marsh route over Pritchard's denials. Before leaving, she gave him a frequency for the Day County Authority itself became the danger. The photograph beneath Mary's cabinet showed 6 younger men in jungle fatigues. Elias stood beside Caleb, the radio operator whose grin survived rain and exhaustion. In Vietnam, they had learned to move by the shape of ground rather than the confidence of maps, and to wait while armed men argued themselves into mistakes. On their last mission, Caleb broke cover to help families trapped near a flooded village. Elias followed, and together they led 31 people through mud before dawn. Caleb went back for a wounded boy and was hit from a tree line Elias had believed empty. Dying, he warned Elias. Don't turn this into permission. For years, Elias thought Caleb meant permission to hate. After Mary, he understood that guilt could license cruelty as easily as anger. If violence found him again, he would not use Caleb's death to excuse what Caleb would have condemned. A truck door slammed outside. Elias closed the radio panel. Sheriff Pritchard entered without knocking, accompanied by the nervous deputy. The deputy's nameplate read, Lyle. He was no more than 26. Sweat darkened his shirt beneath the arms, though the cabin was cool. Pritchard surveyed the room. Mrs. Belle leave. She has a home. Where are your property records? Recorded at the courthouse, I expect. Pritchard walked to the sewing cabinet. Elias saw the sheriff's eyes find the floorboard gap. Too quickly. Someone had told him where older families hid valuables, or he had searched the cabin before. Pritchard moved the cabinet aside with his boot and pried up the board. The hollow space was empty except for the photograph Elias had deliberately left behind. Pritchard lifted it. The deputy leaned closer. 6 soldiers looked back through decades of fading chemicals. "What outfit?" Pritchard asked. Elias returned to the table and resumed mending the crawfish trap. "Army." "I can see Army." Pritchard turned the photograph over. On the back, in Mary's handwriting, were the words Elias and Caleb, Quantum Province, 1967. Beneath that, the faded green and gold shoulder flash was visible on one man's sleeve. Deputy Lyle recognized it first. Special Forces. Pritchard's expression changed only around the mouth. "That's so. Long time ago." The sheriff studied Elias anew, not with fear yet, with recalculation. "You planning something?" "I planned beans for supper." Pritchard placed the photograph on the table but kept one finger on Caleb's face. "Old service doesn't put you above county authority." "No." "Doesn't make you bulletproof either." "No." The simple answers unsettled him more than defiance would have. Pritchard searched the remaining cabinets, opened Mary's recipe tin, lifted mattress corners, and finally took the shortwave microphone from its hook. "Who were you calling?" "Shrimp prices." Deputy Lyle looked at the frequency display and then away. Elias caught the glance. The young man knew enough radio to recognize a band, but not enough courage to challenge Pritchard. The sheriff pulled the microphone cable loose. "County emergency order includes communication restrictions. Can't have an unstable resident calling in false reports." He put the microphone in his pocket. At the door, he paused. "Royce said sunset. I advise you not to test whether he means it." "You advise him often." Pritchard turned. For 1 second, authority dropped from his face and something meaner showed beneath. Then he smiled. "I've kept peace in this parish 18 years. "No," Elias said. "You've kept quiet." Pritchard crossed the room in 2 strides and struck the trap from Elias's hands. Wire scraped the floor. Deputy Lyle flinched. The sheriff leaned close enough for Elias to smell coffee and clove gum. "At 5:30, Pritchard whispered. "I come back with a removal order. You sign. You get driven to a motel. You refuse. The cabin gets condemned, and everything in it becomes evidence. At 6, Royce brings equipment through the South Tract. By then, there won't be a judge in Louisiana who can put this place back the way it was." There it was, the timetable. Elias kept his breathing shallow and let his eyes water from pain. "Then why wait?" "Because a signed deed is cleaner." Pritchard left. Deputy Lyle bent as if to pick up the trap, stopped when the sheriff called his name, and followed. Outside, the cruiser started and rolled east. Elias listened until it crossed the cattle guard. 5:30 for the forge removal, 6 for the convoy. Sunset a little after 8. The extra time was not mercy. They needed darkness for whatever would move along the hidden road. He retrieved the photograph. Caleb's grin had been scratched by Pritchard's ring. Elias wiped the surface with his sleeve and set it beside the radio. The microphone was gone, but the radio was not silent. A key could be made from 2 contacts and a piece of metal. Elias removed the brass tag marked CR, held it between thumb and forefinger, and touched it across the exposed terminals. The carrier clicked alive. In Baton Rouge, Mara Ellison heard the coded phrase while sorting old fishing gear beside a scanner she never stopped monitoring. She wrote the words on an envelope. Bay Mare meant compromised authority. Crow Crossing gave the place. 3 bells before dark meant lawful help was needed before the light failed. Mara called the state police district office, then the Attorney General's public corruption desk. A clerk told her to contact the parish sheriff. "That's the problem," Mara said. She reached Assistant Attorney General Dorian Pike, who remembered both her and Pritchard. Pike could request patrols but needed evidence to bypass local control. Mara told him to search emergency easements, the holding company tied to the old gin, and any survey of Crow land. "You're driving there," he said. "Yes, you're retired. I remember." She left her revolver locked away so Pritchard could not turn her into the excuse he needed. She took a camera, recorder, parish maps, and a state radio capable of reaching beyond local repeaters, then drove west. Back at the cabin, Elias crossed the garden carrying a hoe and a paper sack. Anyone watching would see a man tending okra. He moved row by row, pausing often to straighten his back. At the far edge, hidden by pole beans, he uncovered a narrow path into cane. It led to the cemetery fence, where the ground rose 6 feet above the floodplain. The red clay trail behind Mary's grave showed 3 motorcycle tracks, 1 truck tread, and the heel marks of men who had dismounted to inspect the old church route. Someone had cut a survey ribbon from a sweet gum and moved the iron marker 20 yards east. The fraudulent map would make the access road appear outside Elias's property line. Pritchard did not merely intend to steal land. He meant to erase the boundary after using it. Elias photographed the tracks with Mary's old instant camera, placing a ruler beside the deepest print. The pictures developed slowly, pale shapes darkening in his hand. He wrapped them in wax paper and slid them beneath the lining of his hat. A twig snapped behind him. Tucker Vane stood 10 yards away with a pistol low against his thigh. He had come on foot, moving better than his age suggested. His eyes went from the camera to the tracks, then to Mary's grave through the trees. "You ought to be inside pretending none of this is happening," Tucker said. "I was never good at pretending. Royce thinks different. Royce believes whatever makes the next minute easier." Tucker took 2 steps closer. A pale scar ran from his ear into his collar. "Crowe, you kin to an Elias Crowe who served with 5th Group?" Elias did not answer. "My daddy told a story," Tucker continued. "He ran helicopters out of Pleiku. Said there was a sergeant named Crowe who brought villagers through a flooded valley with half a team and 1 radio man. Said Crowe went back when everybody else was told to pull out. Your father tell you what it cost?" Tucker's pistol lowered another inch. "He said a man named Rusk didn't come home." The swamp grew very quiet around them. "What are you doing with Royce Maddox?" Elias asked. Tucker looked toward the hidden trail. "Making late choices." "Late choices still count." A motorcycle engine started north of them. Tucker's head turned sharply. He stepped back into shade. "Royce has men at June Bell's place. He thinks she took your papers." Elias felt the old pressure rise behind his ribs, the body remembering danger before thought could name it. He did not reach for Tucker. He did not run. Panic would spend the minutes June needed. "How many?" "2 there. 1 watching the church road. Royce is coming back at noon." "Why tell me?" "Because my father said Crowe was the kind of man you warned once." Tucker raised the pistol, not aiming, only reminding them both of what he was. "And because Royce is the kind you don't warn at all." He disappeared into the cane. Elias waited 10 seconds, then 20. The information might be bait. Tucker might hope to flush him toward June, but a liar usually added certainty. Tucker had offered numbers, route, time, and motive, then left the decision behind. Elias turned toward the abandoned church. The shortest path crossed open ground. The safer path curved through blackwater and took twice as long. He chose the water. The water reached Elias's thighs before the ground fell away. He eased into an old pirogue hidden under button bush and pushed with a pole cut smooth by years of use. No engine, no wake. The channel curved behind curtains of Spanish moss, too narrow for an ordinary boat and too deep for a man who did not know where the bottom vanished. Elias's shoulders protested each push. Twice he stopped, not from caution, but because his left hand cramped around the pole. Age was not disguise. It was a weight he carried honestly. He passed the mouth of Belle Slough and heard voices at June's house. A screen door banged. One of the saints shouted that the truck was still warm. Another cursed from inside. They had arrived after June left. That gave her perhaps 15 minutes. Elias pushed on. Near the church bend, a thin film of gasoline shone on the water. The biker watching the road had hidden his motorcycle behind the ruins of a bait shack. Elias could hear the occasional click of cooling metal. He grounded the pirogue beneath a fallen cypress and climbed onto roots slick as bone. The abandoned Mount Olive church stood on a patch of high earth where freed families had raised the first building after the war between the states. The current structure dated from 1912. White paint gone gray, steeple leaning south. Floods had taken the pew cushions. Raccoons had taken the choir loft. But the bell remained. Mary had sung there as a girl. Caleb's memorial had been held there when the Army sent an empty flag to Louisiana. Elias approached from behind the cemetery wall. The biker stood at the front steps, smoking and watching the road. He wore mirrored glasses and held a shotgun across his belly. June's feed sack lay in the weeds near the door. The church bell gave one soft movement overhead. Elias looked up. No wind. June was alive in the steeple. He moved along the rear foundation and found the small crawl opening beneath the baptism room. The wooden cover had been replaced crooked. Under the floor, the document case was gone. June had hidden it somewhere else after seeing the guard. Good. The biker heard a sound and walked around the side. Elias lowered himself into brown water beneath the church. Mosquitoes gathered against his ears. Through gaps in the floorboards, he saw boots pass above. The man stopped directly overhead, spat through a crack, and called, "Old lady, Royce says come down nice. We ain't got all day." June answered from above, "Then leave." The biker laughed. "Your choice." He went back toward the front. Elias found the bell rope where it descended inside the wall. June had pulled it up, but a frayed end hung beneath the floor. He touched it twice, paused, then once. An old signal Mary had used when calling children from the river. Danger. Stay put. Above him, the floor creaked once in reply. The watcher had parked on the only dry trail. He expected Elias from the cabin side and June to descend eventually. What he did not understand was that Mount Olive had been rebuilt after the flood of 1927, with an escape hatch behind the choir, a fact every child in the old congregation once knew. Elias crawled to the west foundation and pushed at a square of rotted lattice. It gave enough for his arm. He reached the hatch latch from below and raised it a fraction. June's face appeared in shadow. "About time," she whispered. "Papers? Baptism cistern. Can you get down? My knees hate you already." He helped her through the hatch inch by inch. The floor complained. At the front, the biker stopped pacing. June froze with one foot in the crawl space. Elias held her weight against his shoulder until the man resumed moving. They slipped into the water behind the church. June bit down on a sound when mud took her shoe. Elias left it. The pirogue carried them through a channel hidden by duckweed. Behind them, the biker shouted. A shotgun blast broke branches above the water, too high and too late. June crouched low, one stockinged foot muddy to the ankle, fury stronger than fear. He shot at us. He shot at where we were. That's supposed to improve my mood. No. The channel forked. Elias sent the pirogue left and dragged a dead branch behind them until the water showed a broad disturbance. Then he backed into reeds and poled through the narrower right fork. The gesture was simple, more misdirection than trick. Men in pursuit trusted movement they could see. The biker reached the bank and fired again toward the left channel. His partner from June's house arrived on a motorcycle. The two argued, then roared away along the levee road, following the false trail toward a place where the bank sank into impassable gumbo. Elias let them go. June breathed out. "How many times have you done that?" "In this swamp?" "Once." "You know what I mean." He did. "Enough." They landed at a cane island behind Elias's south field. There, beneath an overturned skiff, he kept hurricane supplies, water, matches, canvas, and an old battery radio. He gave June dry socks and told her to wait while he checked the cabin. She refused until he explained that Royce would search the obvious hiding places first and return to the church after. Cane Island was not on any map, and from 10 yards away it looked like floating vegetation. "You come back," she said. "I intend to." Intentions don't impress Graves. The word struck harder than she meant. She saw it and softened. "Mary would tell you not to carry everybody alone." "Mary told me many things. Listen to one of them." Elias left by foot along a ridge of submerged roots. At noon exactly, Royce Maddox returned to the cabin with Tucker, Sheriff Pritchard, Deputy Lyle, and 6 saints. Elias watched from the tree line as they entered every room. Royce kicked through cabinets. Pritchard emerged with the old photograph and spoke to Tucker. Even at a distance, Elias saw Tucker's face close. Royce held the picture up by one corner. "This your ghost story?" Tucker said something Elias could not hear. Royce laughed and threw the photograph into the yard. "He's 72. Pritchard did not laugh. He pointed toward the radio. One of the bikers pulled it from the shelf and carried it outside. They smashed the casing with a tire iron. The first blow broke the tuning glass. The second bent the chassis. The brass tag Elias had used as a key was no longer attached, but the men did not notice its absence. Elias felt the sound in his chest. It was only equipment. Copper, tubes, metal, dust. Yet Caleb's hands had adjusted those knobs under rain. Mary had listened to hurricane warnings through that speaker. Royce's men were not destroying a radio. They were telling him that memory survived only by their permission. He stayed in the trees. That restraint cost him. One saint carried a red fuel can from the pickup and splashed a line across the porch. Pritchard grabbed the man's arm and pointed toward the dry grass. Royce shoved the sheriff away. Their argument grew heated. Elias could have moved then, could have stepped from cover with the old deer rifle stored in the shed, could have made the first shot count. He knew exactly where each man stood. Caleb's last words returned. "Don't turn this into permission." Elias watched Pritchard force the fuel can down. The sheriff wanted the cabin intact until papers were signed. Lawful greed remained greed, but its need for appearances created boundaries. Elias could use those boundaries. A dead man could not testify. A burned deed could not prove fraud. Royce wanted fear. Pritchard wanted a clean file. Their alliance was already a crack. Deputy Lyle wandered toward the garden while the others searched. Elias stepped from behind a pecan trunk just far enough to be seen. Lyle startled, hand dropping to his holster. "Don't," Elias said. The deputy's hand stopped. "You know what he's doing. I know you're interfering with an emergency order. No emergency number, no judge's signature, no parish seal pressed into the page." Lyle's eyes shifted toward the cabin. "You saw it." "I saw what wasn't there." The deputy swallowed. "You should sign. They'll hurt Mrs. Bell. They already tried. That frightened him. Where is she?" "Safe until someone tells Royce otherwise. You think I'm with them. You wear the same channel on your radio." Lyle looked down at the shoulder microphone he touched whenever static broke. "Sheriff says the state frequency is down. Sheriff says many things he needs to become true." Elias took the developed photographs from his hat and held them where Lyle could see the moved marker and red clay tracks. "That is felony land fraud. Those are vehicle impressions from the gang. The boot print belongs to Royce. Your cruiser logs will show when Pritchard brought him here. At some point today, you decide whether your name belongs on the evidence or beside it." Voices approached. Elias withdrew behind the tree before Royce rounded the garden shed. Lyle remained alone, staring at the place where he had stood. Royce found only the hoe Elias had left against the beans. "Old man," he shouted, "you hiding in your own weeds?" Elias was already moving south. Mara reached the parish boundary and found the highway blocked by sheriff's units and a dump truck under a false chemical spill warning. A deputy could not name the chemical or the wind direction. She detoured to a levee road and found a pine freshly chained across it. Pritchard was isolating the district. From a payphone, Mara learned that Pike had found the fraud. A repealed emergency statute, a holding company linked to Royce's family, and a survey certification copied from a dead man's license. Captain Landry was assembling state police, but the blocked highway still delayed them. At a closed bait shop, Mara saw an aluminum skiff chained beside the bayou. Its owner appeared after she gave Elias's name. "Crowe helped my boy in the '73 flood," he said, handing her the fuel tank. "Bring it back when the sheriff's in jail." Mara took the skiff into the Blackwater. At Cane Island, June heard an engine and crouched beneath the canvas. It passed, returned, and stopped. A man called her name in Sheriff Pritchard's voice. "Mrs. Bell, Elias has been injured. Come out so we can help him." June closed her eyes. Elias had told her men would use kindness only after threats failed. She kept still. The canvas lifted behind her. Royce Maddox smiled down from the overturned skiff. Mud streaked his vest. Tucker stood several feet away with his face hard and unreadable. "Found you," Royce said. June swung the old battery radio at him. It struck his cheek. Royce caught her wrist, twisted until she dropped it, and pulled her into the open. She kicked his shin and called him a name Mary would have admired. Royce backhanded her. Not hard enough to knock her down, but hard enough to announce what came next. Tucker stepped forward. "You said no rough work." "I said no bodies before dark." Royce wiped blood from his cheek. "There's a difference." He bound June's hands with a strip of cloth and forced her into the black pickup. Tucker watched the cane behind them. "You knew this place," Royce said. "No. You knew Crowe would hide her off the maps." "I knew he'd move her." Royce studied him. "Your old man really tells stories about Elias Crowe." Tucker said nothing. Royce leaned close. "Then here's the ending. Green Beret or not, he's going to crawl into his yard and sign because we have the only person still willing to miss him." Tucker looked at June in the truck. "You keep believing fear works the same on everybody." "It works on everybody." "No, it works different. That's what gets men killed." Royce smiled without humor. "Careful, Tucker." They drove toward the cabin. Elias returned to Cane Island 20 minutes later and found the radio broken, the canvas torn, and one of June's dry socks in the mud. Tire tracks pressed through the shallow water. The black pickup had approached along the red clay ridge from behind the cemetery. Royce had found the island because the stolen survey showed old land contours beneath the floodplain. The moved marker had not been only for paperwork. It aligned their map with the hidden route. On the overturned skiff, someone had scratched a single V into the algae. Tucker. A warning or a signature. Elias could not know which. He picked up June's radio. The battery compartment had cracked open. One cell remained intact. He carried it, the brass tag, and the wet sock back toward the cabin while the sun tilted west. At 3:10, Royce tied June to a chair on Elias's porch. Pritchard parked his cruiser beside the grave and set up a folding table with the forged deed. Two gang members hauled crates from the old gin truck to the edge of the South Trail. The crates were marked as machine parts, but handled with the nervous care of men moving something worth prison. More motorcycles arrived through the North Woods. The Iron Saints now occupied the property in 3 rings. Watchers near the parish road, armed men around the cabin, and drivers preparing the swamp crossing. Pritchard paced beside June. "Tell us where he put the documents." "Under your conscience." Royce laughed. Pritchard did not. Mrs. Bell, obstruction of a county order can be charged as... Forgery has a longer word count. Deputy Lyle stood near the cruiser, pale and silent. He had not shown Pritchard the photographs because Elias still carried them. He had, however, changed his radio from the sheriff's private channel to the state mutual aid frequency. Every few minutes, static answered. The sheriff noticed and ordered him back. "Interference," Lyle said. "I was checking." "Stop checking." At 3:45, Elias entered the yard openly from the garden path. He leaned heavily on his cane. Mud covered his trousers. His face looked gray. June straightened in the chair. "Don't you sign anything." Royce stepped between them. "There he is, the jungle legend." Elias looked at the bruise on June's cheek, then at Tucker. Tucker did not look away. Pritchard lifted the deed. "Sign, and she goes home." "No," June said. Royce put a hand on her shoulder. Elias saw her fight the instinct to recoil. "What is in the crates?" Elias asked. Royce grinned. "Retirement gifts." "Stolen bearer bonds from the Saint Amant warehouse." For the first time all day, Royce lost control of his face. Elias had guessed only part. The fire, stripped trucks, secret route, and careful handling suggested compact property that could not be traced through ordinary resale. His guess landed close enough to expose truth. Pritchard turned on Royce. "You said cash. Same difference." "No, it isn't." The crack widened. Elias looked at Lyle. "Your microphone records emergency traffic at the repeater, deputy. Ask him why he doesn't want that conversation on the state channel." Pritchard reached for Lyle's radio. The deputy stepped back. Royce drew his pistol and pressed it against the back of June's chair. "Enough theater. Sign." Elias moved to the table. His hand trembled as he accepted the pen. Pritchard spread the forged deed flat. The legal description shifted Mary's grave outside the retained parcel. The fraud was complete and careless. It carried the dead surveyor's seal, a false emergency citation, and a transfer clause hidden beneath easement language. Elias read every line. "Sign," Royce repeated. "I need my spectacles." "You just read it." "Then you know I'm stalling." Royce struck him across the mouth with the pistol. Elias fell against the table and went to one knee. June shouted. Tucker took one involuntary step forward. Pritchard looked toward the road, suddenly afraid of how the scene would appear to anyone outside their circle. Elias tasted blood and felt an old tooth loosen. The yard swam, then steadied. He was not invincible. He was a 72-year-old man who had slept badly, crossed cold water, and been hit by someone half his age. His right knee might not lift him without help. He used the table. When he stood, Royce looked satisfied. Pain had given the gang leader back the story he understood. Elias signed the deed with a slow, wavering hand. June stared at him as if he had disappeared. Pritchard snatched the paper, checked the line, and exhaled. Royce untied June from the chair but kept one hand around her arm. "Let her go," Elias said. "At dark," Royce answered. "After the road is open and we're across." That wasn't the bargain. Bargains change. Elias wiped blood from his lip. So do signatures. Pritchard looked down. Elias had signed Caleb Rusk. The sheriff's face went white with rage. Royce raised the pistol again. Tucker caught his wrist. "Not here," Tucker said. "Not with every man watching." For a second, they stood locked together. Royce's younger men shifted, uncertain which authority to obey. June twisted free and reached Elias, but Pritchard grabbed her before she could run. Then the cabin radio, smashed in the yard, gave a single click. Everyone looked toward it. The broken set could not transmit. Its speaker hung loose. Yet from somewhere beyond the grave came another click, then two, then a long burst of static. Elias had used the surviving battery cell and brass tag to wake a second field set hidden years ago in the cemetery toolshed. The signal itself carried no words. It did not need to. 3 pulses marked the start of the old code Mara knew. Compromised authority confirmed, innocent held, root active. The speaker died after the last burst. The improvised connection had failed. Royce stared at the woods. Who heard that? Elias looked at the lowering sun. That is the bigger question. Royce ordered the convoy to move early. Waiting had begun to feel like surrender, and men like him would rather rush into danger than let another man control the clock. He sent 2 motorcycles ahead through the cemetery trail, the black pickup behind them with June between Tucker and a younger saint. Then the crate truck. Pritchard followed in his cruiser. Elias was forced into the passenger seat beside him. Deputy Lyle drove a second unit at the rear. The sun hung red between the cypress trunks. Engines filled the narrow trail with heat and exhaust. Red clay rose in dust around the tires, painting every wheel, boot, and lower door with the same unmistakable stripe Elias had seen on Royce that morning. The move survey marker lay beside the trail where the gang had discarded it. Lyle slowed long enough to see it. He keyed his radio once on the state channel, allowing the open carrier to capture the convoy noise, and Pritchard's shouted order to keep moving. "What are you doing?" the sheriff demanded over his shoulder. "Radio check." "Turn it off." Lyle left it on. The trail narrowed behind Mary's grave and descended into swamp. Maps showed a continuous raised road to Mount Olive and the old bridge beyond. The map was wrong in 3 places. Spring floods had eaten the eastern shoulder. Cypress roots had lifted the middle into a ridge too sharp for the crate truck's low axle. The bridge itself still stood from a distance, but the center pilings had shifted years ago. Elias had told Royce that maps did not bear weight. Royce had heard an old man's warning and mistaken it for fear. The first motorcycle crossed the soft shoulder. Its rear wheels sank to the hub. The second rider tried to pass, slid sideways, and blocked the trail. The pickup stopped hard. The crate truck braked behind it, tilting as its right tires settled into mud. Men shouted and climbed down. Royce came back along the line. "Clear it." "There isn't room," Tucker said. "Then make room." "You can't make ground." Royce looked toward Elias in the cruiser. The old man sat with blood dried at his mouth and both hands visible on his cane. He had done nothing to the road. That frightened Royce more than a visible trap. The swamp did not need Elias to become dangerous. It needed only strangers who refused to listen. Pritchard pulled Elias from the cruiser. "You know another way." "Several." "Which one carries the truck?" "None before dark." Royce pressed the pistol under Elias's jaw. "Then June walks into the water first." Tucker opened the pickup door and helped June down. His hand lingered at her elbow, steady rather than controlling. June saw the decision in his face before Royce did. "Put her by the bridge," Royce ordered. Tucker did not move. Royce turned. "You deaf?" "My father said Caleb Rusk died saving people your kind would have left behind." Tucker's voice carried down the stalled convoy. "Said Elias Crowe spent 20 years thinking survival made him guilty. You think that makes him weak. It makes him careful." Royce's eyes narrowed. "You choosing him?" "No. I'm choosing not to become you." The younger saint beside June reached for her. Tucker shoved him away. Royce swung the pistol toward Tucker, and in that instant, Deputy Lyle stepped from his cruiser with his service weapon drawn. "Drop it, Maddox." Pritchard stared at his deputy. "Lyle, stand down." "The state channel's open, Sheriff." Pritchard looked at the radio light glowing inside the rear cruiser. His legal cover vanished in one small green square. Royce fired into the air. Birds erupted from the swamp. Men scattered, not because the shot struck anyone, but because nobody knew who would shoot next. The crate truck shifted deeper into the shoulder. One box slid from the bed, split at a corner, and spilled bundles of securities wrapped in oilcloth. Pritchard lunged to cover them. Lyle saw. His radio saw. Tucker saw. Elias moved to June. He did not attack Royce. He took June's bound wrists and guided her behind the thick base of a cypress, while confusion spread. A bullet struck water several yards away. Another shattered a cruiser window. Sound bounced among the trunks, making every shot seem to come from 3 directions. The Saints fired at movement they imagined. Muzzle flashes blinded them to what stood between flashes. Elias kept June low and waited for the panic to spend itself. "Can you walk?" he asked. "I can run if you stop asking." "Not yet." Royce shouted for the men to push the motorcycles aside and move the pickup across the bridge. He believed motion could restore command. 2 Saints dragged the bikes into brush. Tucker backed toward Elias, keeping his pistol pointed at the ground. "West side of the church," Elias told him. "Take June." "You?" June said. "I need Pritchard on the record." "You already have half the parish on the radio. Half the parish has learned not to hear." Tucker cut June's bonds. Together they slipped toward the trees as the pickup lurched around the bogged motorcycles. Royce climbed behind the wheel. Pritchard grabbed the forged deed and the exposed securities, then climbed into the passenger seat. He had stopped pretending to be sheriff. He was simply another thief trying to leave with evidence. Elias stepped into the trail ahead of the truck. Royce revved the engine. "Move." "No." The word was not loud. It did not need to be. Behind Elias, the old bridge crossed a channel black as oil. Its rails leaned outward. The western approach showed a pale scar where red clay had broken away. Royce could see the church beyond, then higher ground, then freedom. He could also see one old man between him and the crossing. Pritchard leaned out the window. "Run him down." Royce hesitated. That hesitation was the moment he understood. Elias had never been waiting for mercy. He had been measuring which man would give the unlawful order, which man would obey it, and who would be listening when they did. The state radio in Lyle's cruiser carried Pritchard's voice clearly. "Run him down." Mara heard it from her skiff less than a mile away. Captain Landry heard it from the highway staging point after the false chemical closure was cleared. Dorian Pike heard the recording begin at the district office. Pritchard's 18 years of clean phrases ended in 4 words. Royce drove forward. Elias waited until the truck was close enough for the headlights to erase everything behind him. Then he stepped off the trail, not quickly, but at the last moment Royce believed an old man could move. The pickup passed and struck the bridge approach. Rotten planks thundered. The front wheels made the first span. The rear wheels reached the shifted center and dropped as the roadbed twisted. The pickup slammed against the rail and stopped, tilted over Blackwater. No explosion, no glorious destruction, only gravity, bad timber, and a map believed by arrogant men. Pritchard crawled through the passenger window, clutching the deed. Royce kicked at the jammed door and shouted for help. Water rose around the rear tires. The securities Pritchard had grabbed fell into mud. Elias walked to the edge of the bridge. Royce aimed through the cracked windshield. "You did this," he said. "No," Elias answered. "You were told the bridge was gone." Royce's hand shook. The pistol followed Elias but could not settle. Every sound in the swamp now seemed chosen. A bell moving at Mount Olive, a boat motor approaching through the channel, state sirens far beyond the trees, Lyle ordering gang members to put down weapons, Tucker calling June's name from high ground. Royce had built his life on making other people imagine the worst. Now the swamp returned the favor. He saw soldiers behind cypress trunks where there were only shadows. He heard coded signals and frogs and engine echoes. He saw Elias's thin silhouette, and behind it, every story Tucker's father had ever told. Pritchard stumbled up the bank, mud to his knees. "Shoot him!" Royce looked at the sheriff. "You shoot him!" Pritchard drew his revolver. Lyle's voice came from the trail. "Sheriff, don't." Pritchard turned toward his deputy, and Elias saw the decision before the gun moved. He struck Pritchard's wrist with the cane. Age made the blow clumsy, but surprise made it enough. The revolver fell into the mud. Pritchard drove a shoulder into Elias and knocked him down. They went to the ground together, one old in years and one old in corruption, neither graceful. Pritchard reached for the weapon. Elias caught his sleeve and held on. He did not choke him, strike his head, or reach for the pistol. He held the sheriff's arm in the mud until Lyle arrived and kicked the revolver away. "Wade Pritchard," Lyle said, voice breaking, "you are under arrest." The sheriff laughed once. "By who?" A state police spotlight swept across the trees. "By everyone you blocked out," Mara Ellison said. She came from the channel with 2 state troopers and a wildlife officer, while Captain Landry's team entered from the cleared highway. Blue lights flickered through cypress moss. Orders moved down the trail. Saints who had spent years trusting Pritchard's badge dropped weapons when badges from outside the parish appeared. Those who ran found water, thorn, and mud where their stolen survey promised roads. They were taken one by one, wet and exhausted, without the swamp needing a single grave. June emerged beside Tucker at Mount Olive. She crossed the trail and knelt next to Elias. "You look terrible." "So do you." "Liar." Mara helped Lyle cuff Pritchard, then photographed the forged deed where it lay in red clay. She photographed Royce's boot when troopers pulled him from the tilted pickup. The same clay striped the sole, the bridge approach, the move survey marker, the tires of the crate truck, and the trail behind Mary's grave. In daylight, the clue had seemed small. Under evidence lamps, it became a chain. The red soil proved Royce had trespassed before the supposed easement was served. The relocated marker proved the survey had been manipulated. The matching vehicle impressions tied the gang to the hidden access route. The securities in the broken crate tied them to the Saint, a Mont warehouse theft. Pritchard's voice on the open state channel tied threat, fraud, obstruction, and attempted violence together in his own words. Mara found Elias's instant photograph still dry beneath his hat. "You were building the case all day." "I was trying to keep it from becoming something else." She looked at Pritchard in cuffs, Royce face down on the bridge approach, June alive, and Tucker sitting unarmed beside a cypress while the trooper read him his rights. "You came close." "I know." Tucker did not ask for praise or immunity. He gave a statement about the holding company, the warehouse fire, the survey fraud, and every man involved. His choice to protect June would be entered as fact, not turned into innocence. Late choices still counted, but they did not erase earlier ones. Royce was pulled upright. Mud covered his vest. He looked at Elias with hatred emptied of certainty. "You think you're a judge?" he asked. Elias leaned on June's shoulder until he found his cane. "No, that's why you're alive to meet one." Mara later thought the case deserved the kind of headline nobody in the parish paper would dare print. They gave him until sunset, not knowing the swamp, hid a Green Beret who would pass judgment. But judgment, as Elias understood it, was not the bridge failing or armed men losing their nerve. It was evidence preserved when rage would have destroyed it. It was an innocent woman walking home. It was a corrupt badge removed under law. It was surviving the chance to become what grief had once invited him to be. Night settled over the Crowe place while state officers worked. The cabin porch smelled of spilled gasoline, but it had not burned. The old radio lay broken in the yard. Mary's blue jar was beyond repair. The garden had been trampled near the beans. Justice did not restore everything. It only stopped the taking and named who had done it. In the months that followed, Royce Maddox and the Iron Saints faced charges for armed kidnapping, theft, arson conspiracy, assault, and organized transport of stolen property. Wade Pritchard was removed from office and charged with obstruction, land fraud, evidence tampering, and conspiracy. The emergency easement was voided. The holding company dissolved under seizure, Deputy Lyle testified before a grand jury and resigned before the next election. Tucker Vane entered a guilty plea and testified without asking the county to forget his part. The land remained Elias's. At sunrise after the arrests, Elias walked to Mary's grave carrying two things: the largest piece of blue glass and Caleb Rusk's brass radio tag. June had gone home to wash swamp mud from her hair, though she promised to return with coffee strong enough to punish him. Mara slept in her car beside the state command post. The bayou was quiet except for insects and the soft movement of water under roots. Elias set the blue glass at the base of Mary's stone. "I kept the place," he said. The words sounded smaller than the day had been. That felt right. Mary had never trusted large declarations. He took Caleb's tag to the porch and placed it beside the window instead of returning it to the hidden floor. Morning light caught the scratched initials. For the first time in years, Elias let the past sit where anyone could see it. Not as a weapon, not as permission, but as a cost remembered honestly. They gave him until sunset, because they saw a helpless old man. By sunrise, Royce Maddox understood that some swamps remember the soldiers who came home silent.